dynamics. So what I want to do today is draw on my conversations in Ankara to reflect Ankara's perspective mostly um, about sort of a horizon of conflicts. I'm really not going to get into the past, like how we got here, because it's long and I want to spend more time on question and answers and hear what you're interested in. Of course, there have been a number of phases that brought Turkey to the policies, strategies it's implementing now, and there's been a lot of improvisation and recalibration, but what I'm going to talk about more is like the current past year perspectives. And to start by saying, the sense that you get in Ankara is that it's functioning in a world between orders, a world that's moving towards multipolarity, the speed of which is perhaps overestimated, but nevertheless, you see the sort of attempt to, or the aspiration to carve out a more autonomous strategic space in a strategic scene that's in flux. One sort of common thread as a background is that there's a sense that the US is no longer the center of gravity in many of the theaters where Turkey is vying for more influence. And you see Ankara as sort of variably aligning with or counterbalancing in some cases other powers that have a comparative advantage and a willingness to act in these theaters. So this can include in some places Russia, it can be China, it can be various EU member states or non-EU European states, Gulf countries, obviously increasingly on the scene, and sometimes Iran, sometimes other countries. There's a little bit of a case-by-case, sort of multi-alignment as it's called. And what I see Ankara doing is often putting itself, often meaning in the last year in particular, my observations are referred to, putting itself at the center of the drawing board and seeking partnerships according to what other countries have to offer or how much of a priority a particular conflict is for them. So are their strengths complementary? Are there leverages, something that Turkey can either compete with or would need to stack up support from? You know, there's a sort of, each case can be very different, so it's very hard to give a broad brush explanation of what Turkey's doing that would apply to all regions or all conflicts. There's one more thing I'd like to add before I start going through a geography, is that I usually don't like generalizing Turkey as a monolith because it's very diverse. Obviously, the society is diverse, but also the political spectrum. I would say, though, that a lot of the points I am going to make have a relative alignment between the mainstream opposition, the ruling party, and the broader society. There are a lot of exceptions. I would say, particularly there are exceptions on the degree to which collaboration with the West is desirable as an end goal. And there's also differences among the political spectrum about ideological undertone, so the discourse about conflicts. There I see significant divergences, but a lot of what I'm going to cover, I think, is more or less, you know, what does Turkey want? Well, you know, it's obviously a generalization, but it, I think, fits. My main takeaway will be that in the past year, Ankara deems itself as doing quite well. And I'll run through briefly a list of conflicts or theaters to just give a sense of the diversity of what Turkey is doing and what it wants. So first with Ukraine, it seemed at first that it would be unsustainable that Turkey managed this tightrope between Russia and Ukraine and the West, but actually it's managed so far. Throughout Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine, and even though it's supporting Ukraine's positions and its war efforts, Turkey has managed to keep its economic ties with Russia strong, and also has ensured that Moscow isn't incentivized to disrupt Turkey's position in countries where it has leverages, say Syria, Azerbaijan. And I would generally say that Turkey's sort of go-between roles vis-a-vis Ukraine and Russia have been valuable. You used to have the Black Sea grain deal, not functioning now, but nevertheless, it was a positive example. And of course, the prisoner exchange, both between Ukraine and Russia, that was negotiated by the intelligence and also negotiated by the intelligence, the Western countries and Russia prisoner swap. So that's one. Secondly, the relations with the Gulf countries that Turkey was strained with, UAE and Saudi Arabia, plus Egypt, that's not in the Gulf. I think the repair of relations, it's not perfect, but it's functional. And it's diffused Ankara's sense of diplomatic encirclement that also was very prominent in the way it was projected in the East Med. And you see, like in countries like Libya and Somalia, where Turkey has military presence, it's quite carefully navigating the Gulf state rivalries or Egypt's sensitivities. You also see where Turkey's not getting involved. That has to do with its sensitivities with regard involved in Sudan either, where the UAE would have a stronger position. So by and large, that has been a positive trajectory. Thirdly, the South Caucasus, which can extend to Central Asia. I think it's generally regarded as Turkey having moved up in the playing field in this geography. Of course, Russia's preoccupation with Ukraine played a role in Turkey's ability to do so. And you see connectivity as a theme that's really in the forefront. So building a rail and shipping network from Central Asia to Turkey and onwards to Europe, situating Turkey as a hub. That's the sort of win-win design that Turkey, along with Azerbaijan, has been championing. I think it's obvious that Turkey won't be able to compete with China in terms of financial muscle, at least in Central Asia. So you see also some sort of tentative thoughts about how Turkey can collaborate with Western partners that might be interested in that area more to complement its own shortcomings. Sometimes people mention Germany, they mention the UK as possible countries that have an interest in the Middle Corridor. Of course, normalizing its relations with Armenia will also help Turkey in that geography. Connected somewhat to that is another connectivity project that Turkey's been putting a lot of emphasis on, which is yet to be materialized or even begun, but it's a development road that would run from the Basra, the southern port of Iraq, to Turkey. And it's, again, be a railroad and pipeline route. It would require Iraq to get Iran's buy-in because of Iran's strong influence in Iraq. And it also is it's a complex relationship building between Ankara and Iraq that involves security support, and it involves Baghdad's position vis-a-vis the PKK. It probably is going to have to involve water management issues, but it's sort of a new page that there's hope vested in, though of course question marks about. This will be a very big generalization, but I think one can say that Turkey's strategic dialogue with the US and the EU has improved, particularly since Ankara green-lighted Sweden's NATO accession. And there are ongoing efforts to resolve the Russian S-400 missile system issue, Turkey's purchase, which has been a major sticking point in Turkey's relations with the US in particular, and one that I think many in Ankara will admit was a strategic mistake. So usually what you hear about Turkey nowadays in Washington is Turkey is a very difficult partner, but an important one. And I think you can see Turkey and the US managing their divergences, so compartmentalizing them enough to prevent them from spilling over and contaminating the issues where they have a shared interest. There's better deconfliction in Syria. There's collaboration in ensuring that the sanctions circumvention is contained or ended, sanctions towards Russia. So it seems to be a calm phase for now. Now to Africa. Across several theaters on the continent of Africa, from the Horn of Africa to the Sahel, Ankara is finding footing more and more. It's a rising player. It has a number of different components. I can't get into each one in each country, but there's defense sector collaboration. There's Turkey being a mediator in some conflicts, for example, Ethiopia, Somalia. There's infrastructure. Turkey is sort of appreciated as a builder of infrastructure and a provider of humanitarian aid. I was in Ankara this month with my colleagues from Yemen and Kenya, and we were talking about Turkey's role in these geographies. And in general, I understood from my colleagues that there's a generally positive reception of Turkey in these, we were talking particularly about the Horn of Africa, areas, because one reason is that they said the businesses come to stay. They come in a sort of a long-term vision. They share know-how. There's grassroots engagement. There's education elements. There's humanitarian aid. There's capacity building regarding public services and sort of defense establishment. The links that are created with the drone sales. It's not just a sale of drones, for example. You have software updates. You have training. You have relationships that get built between the defense sectors that sometimes can outlast relationships that you build with governments. Of course, Turkey is not welcome in all localities by all communities, particularly those with an Ottoman past, I understand, have more sensitivities. But the Ottoman past is a more distant history than the French colonial past. So it's all a little bit relative, and I understand by and large that there's a upswing, let's say, in Turkey's presence in some areas of Africa. Now to some more sort of unresolved issues, which I'll name a few of. Well, I mean, Greece and Turkey, again, I'll put in the positive list. The trajectory is definitely positive, even if there are unresolved issues that have not, I mean, the maritime disputes remain, but I do believe that there is an attempt to make real progress to reach a settlement on these disputes. I also think that before their feasibility and how that's going to be pursued is settled, I think keeping it quiet has been deemed wiser than a sort of premature public debate. But I get a very positive vibe when these issues come up in Ankara. There are some thorny fronts. I would say the stalemate in Syria is probably one of the most fundamental challenges that has the potential to escalate any time, and there's particular worry now that it could get caught between the Iran-Israel crossfire that might be brewing, and this would have repercussions not only for Turkey's security, direct spillover, but also its relations with the United States. Ankara does seem to be testing the idea of starting a new initiative with PKK, and also has been interested in vocally expressing interest in engaging with Damascus diplomatically, which has not taken place. I think both will be difficult, but if they can inch forward, it would reduce the risks of spillover from Syria. The Cyprus problem, I sort of left it to the last on purpose, because in the larger scheme of things, all these conflicts that are immediate threats, it can sometimes seem like a peripheral issue in Ankara, sort of muddling along where no one dies. And those are the new layers of geopolitical interests and the economic interests have sort of built up, piled up on top of the local conflict. And I would rather hear more from our audience about the prospects, but I do understand there is a positive momentum as well right now, and perhaps more political space, even though even though it's complicated and might take more time. I'm just going to mention a few. Well, Israel, of course, I have to mention Israel. Ankara has obviously taken one of the most harsh stances, vocally at least, about the war in Gaza, and this has had implications for its relations with the US. But the contrary is also true, in that the US is sort of the perceived passivity or the enabling role that's perceived that the US has been conducting has in Turkey diminished the legitimacy of the United States in terms of its voice on norms and international laws and civilian casualties and whatnot. And I think Turkey's view in that sense is shared by many countries in the global south. Turkey is not very active in terms of, well, not active at all, in terms of working on bringing about a ceasefire directly with the sides. But I think the idea is that once there is a ceasefire, that Turkey would play a stronger sort of security role on the ground and also obviously have reconstruction roles at that stage whenever it comes. There are many challenges and many pitfalls, but just to stimulate some debate, I'll mention three that come to my mind. One is that there are sort of inherent clashes in Turkey's strategy to both ease Iranian and Russian anxieties about its penetration into regions that they see as primarily their spheres of influence, and at the same time the effort to sort of curb Western penetration, but at the same time also asking for Western support selectively. Now this is a very hard combination, and it's even difficult to convince Iran and Russia that the corridors or the transportation routes will be a win-win, because yes, they could be a win-win, but Turkey's going to win more, and Turkey's private sector, its soft power, its sort of agility in the business sense will give it an upper hand when you compare it to Russia. I mean, the sense in Turkey is sometimes that Russia is a declining power anyway, so you prevent it from disrupting your project. Today, long term, it's not going to be your life standards and technologies, but they'll also argue that Turkey has to stray away from the West, get stronger, come back with a stronger voice, a higher seat. So that's sort of one line of thinking that I pick up. But then there's also another line of thinking of people that see divergence from the West almost as an end in itself. So I think it'll be interesting to watch how these different elements interact moving forward. And finally, I'll mention a sort of a rhetorical or narrative challenge. You see that Turkey uses varied discourse in different geographies. In some geographies it's more pro-Turkic, in some it's more anti-colonial, in some it's more Islamist. And this does serve a purpose and is welcome by some audiences in both Turkey and in the countries of the being interacted with, but it also alienates some audiences, and it's received as patronizing by others. So I think the sort of narrative issue is another that is a little bit thorny, that can be kept in mind. And I'll leave it there because I would like to sit down and listen to your views and questions.
Thank you, Nigar, for this very interesting overview of Turkish foreign policy. And I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you shared these views, because when we usually discuss Turkey in Cyprus, we place Cyprus at the center of its foreign policy. And it seems to me, from everything you've said today, that this is not really that much true. And I keep, as a summary of everything you've said, that Turkey itself considers its policy successful, which is contrary to the narrative that we sometimes like to hear in Cyprus and say Turkey's failing on all different fronts. Whereas the perception that Ankara has of itself is that it's doing pretty well based on the constraints that it faces on the different terrains that it's playing ball in. And I keep business interests, soft power in terms of education, humanitarian aid, capacity building, connectivity projects, hard power in terms of military industry and technology successes. So I think a summing up sentence would be that Turkey is opening up space, it's moving in to test the waters, and then it stops and maneuvers its way around to make sure that its position doesn't alienate too many people too much. And then, of course, this agility, this maneuvering, is what possibly makes its policy successful. But of course, we also we can also summarize this in one phrase: balancing act. And if I would summarize what you've said today about Turkish foreign policy, is a successful balancing act. So I will say no more. The live streaming has stopped, so the discussion can flow freely. And although we almost all know each other here, I would please ask you to identify yourself when you're making a question.